Who's about to lose some subscribers and has two thumbs? This guy. What is going on, guys? Welcome to The Reformed Reader, the channel where we review different forms of media through the lens of a Christian who is under the authority of the scriptures. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be doing an audiobook review of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, this is a review strictly and explicitly for the full cast audiobook that came out, I believe, back in November, because I don't want anybody to be caught off guard and think that I'm talking about the novel itself, which I actually have here with me. I absolutely love this book. I love everything about it. It's fantastic. But I have recently went back and revisited this story through the full cast audiobook. Now, there are a few things that held me up when this was first released, which they have since, from what I understand, fixed. But there is one glaring drawback to the full cast audiobook, and we're going to talk about it today. So the format's going to be just a little bit different. I'm not going to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly just because you guys already know pretty much what I think about Harry Potter. So I'm not going to tell you all about it. I'm not going to do the little book trailer and all that kind of stuff. Instead, I'm just going to kind of rant about this one glaring issue that I had with this audiobook. Now, some of you guys may be laughing. Some of you guys may be like, okay, this is not the time or place. And I try to be fairly positive, but also want to be completely transparent with you guys in pretty much all ways. So I just want to give you my experience of this full cast audiobook. So I listened to this entire audiobook in 2 days. It was fantastic. There were a couple little nitpicks that I had with it, like they don't pronounce the T in Voldemort, so they call him Voldemort. That was one thing that just kind of irked me in the beginning. Also, when it was first released, it wasn't mixed extremely well, and they have since fixed that. So the audio with the narration and the dialogue and the sound effects and things is all well balanced now. But none of that is really what I have an issue with. As a matter of fact, I have an issue with, I think it's 2 lines of dialogue in the entire book. And this is going to come back to me talking about gratuitous inclusions in a book or in a work in this case. So for those of you who haven't been around for a while, when I do my book reviews, ordinarily what I'll do is I will break down at the end potential sin that might hold a Christian back from picking a book or series or movie or whatever up, just to sort of give them some content warnings and let them know ahead of time, whether or not they want to spend their time and money and energy into a piece of work. And one of those categories is gratuitous inclusions. Now, what I mean by that is like any kind of DEI type stuff that is just like shoehorned in there just for the sake of being diverse and inclusive. I have no problem with a diverse cast. I have no problem with like a cast that some people would consider inclusive if it pertains to the story. But to just like race swap characters, I think is so like such an egregious form of virtue signaling, and it just causes, at best, the audience to roll their eyes. For instance, I love the Magic the Gathering game, and they came out with a Lord of the Rings version, and they made Aragorn black. Something as simple as that. I don't think there's anybody that picked those cards up and went,
you know what? Yeah, Aragorn is black.
No, that's not how he's described. And so they really did that just to sort of virtue signal in order to be inclusive or to be progressive in that sense. And so it really tarnished that set for me as far as those cards go. So there's things like that, also including homosexual relationships for really no reason at all. I've never seen it done well, by the way. Now, again, it's not like I'm saying if there's a gay character in a book that I'm not going to read it, because I've read numerous books that have homosexual characters in them. I've read Picture of Dorian Gray. Spartacus has homosexual characters in it. Dracula leans into that a little bit. I believe there's a character, there's a character in Count of Monte Cristo, and these are just classics, let alone some of the more modern works. So it's not that I won't read it if there's a homosexual in the book, but what I won't read and what I won't tolerate is when it is just shoved in there just for the sake of them saying, see, look how progressive we are. Look how self-righteous we are. Look, and that's really all it comes down to. It's just trying to placate to this new age mob that really is an affront to Christian culture and ideology altogether. So when that happens, I have to take a stand and say, no, I'm not going to be entertained by that. I've talked about this at length in a couple of other videos, but just for the sake of being transparent here and being hopefully not being misunderstood. is that people think that I am drawing a hard line in the sand by saying I'm not going to be entertained by this, when really it is the publisher or the author or musician or whoever. It's them that's drawing a hard line and is saying, no, this is good. This is good. And if you don't agree that it's good, then you're a bigot. Then you are, you ought to be condemned to hell. You hate people. All these sort of clickbaity type things and phrases that are so overblown and overused when really they don't even believe that. What they're doing is they're just trying to push progressive ideas, which is in all actuality, when you get down to it, it's because they hate God, they hate his word, they hate his law, they suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And so rather than them saying there is no God, they're shaking their fists at the heavens and saying, no, God. That's essentially what they're doing. It's not because they don't know that there's a creator. It's they know there's a creator, whether it be in their conscience or they actually actively agree that there is a higher power. They just don't accept that it's the God of the Bible, whatever that case may be. And so they go on the affront. And they say, no, we're going to take a stand. We're going to draw a hard line, and we are going to define what is good and what is right. And this is what is good and what is right according to the world. And so for Christians then, since they have drawn the hard line, we then must, push back and say, no, you don't get to define right. You don't get to define wrong. You don't get to define judgment. You don't get to define righteousness or anything, because you have no standard to base anything other than your own subjective standard. So that's a very long rant for me to say. So this occurred in this Fullcast audiobook. What ended up happening is pretty much everybody here has probably read Harry Potter, but at the end of book 1, it's in the last chapter. It's like midway through the very last chapter of the book. Harry kind of saves the day. He's in the hospital wing. Dumbledore comes and visits him, and they have a discussion about Voldemort. They have a discussion about a couple of other things. And then as Dumbledore's getting ready to leave, Madame Pomfrey, which is the school nurse, she comes in and is trying to shoo Dumbledore away so that way Harry can get some rest. And I just didn't really think about it at the time because, again, I have this full cast going, and I think the rest of the cast was cast flawlessly with this one exception. And so Madame Pomfrey comes in and says something to the effect of, you need to leave. But I noticed that it was a man's voice. And I thought that was kind of odd, but I couldn't figure out why, really. And it's in part, I didn't think about it at first because I'm so used to audiobooks. I'm so used to hearing men try to do feminine voices or females try to do masculine voices, and it almost never is done well. And so I just kind of, didn't even think about it until she had another line in the book, and it was a pretty gravelly, deep voice. And I realized, okay, that's very clearly a man. So what happened here? Because this is a full cast. It's not like they didn't have the budget for it, because they certainly did. So I was trying to figure out, what happened? Did their voice actor that they had chosen before, did she back out? What in the world is going on? And so I look up the voice actor that they chose, and it's a woman's name, and her name is Rebecca Root. And so I just decided to do a quick little Google search, and you find out very, very quickly that she is a transgender woman, and that is who they chose to cast for Madame Pomfrey. Now, it would not have ever crossed my mind, with the exception of Madame Pomfrey's voice is very clearly male, is very clearly masculine. It's deeper than mine, which I don't have a deep voice for a man, but I don't think anybody would mistake my voice for being female. But this was very clearly male. And I'm going to, just for the sake of argument, I'm going to insert that clip here.
Well, of course, that was the headmaster. Quite different. Oh, very well.
And so you can see why it kind of threw me for a loop, because this is very clearly a male voice. And the only reason that Audible or whoever, the folks at Amazon, whoever actually decided to do the full cast audiobook, whoever it may be, they chose to be inclusive and diverse for the sake of being inclusive and diverse, not because it added to the story, not because they were the best voice actor for the job, but solely because they wanted to be able to check a box and say, hey, look at us. We're progressive. We're in the right. We want to be on the right side of history in this regard or what on this topic. That's one of this silly colloquialisms that they tend to overuse and overblow. But anybody listening to that, there isn't a single person with an ounce of integrity that can say, you know what, that was the best voice for the job. That's absolutely preposterous. And so this tarnished my experience with the book. So I will say, if I were to pull those 2 or 3 lines out of the audiobook, that this is a flawless audiobook, especially when it's full cast. I thought it was absolutely perfect. They did such a fantastic job, and I thought it was even better than the Kenobi audiobook by John Jackson Miller, where they had the sound effects and multiple voices and things. I thought that was excellent. That was probably the best full cast type of audiobook that I've heard up till this point. And then I heard this, and it just blew me away until the very end. And all that was for Audible to virtue signal, to check a box, so that way they could then market it to a particular group. But I would be willing to bet that there isn't a single person, again, with an ounce of integrity that could say in earnest that Madame Pomfrey was cast perfectly. No, Madame Humphrey was cast with a transgender woman, which is just a man that has chosen to live out their life as a woman, and they have the freedom to do so. But that doesn't mean that I then have to accept or agree with it. So I just want to warn you guys. I know this is a little bit different of a video than usual. It's a little more of a rant video, and I'm certainly going to lose subscribers over this. That's fine. You don't have to agree with me, but I'm just trying to be consistent with what the word says, and the word tells us what is good and what is not, and we are not to be entertained by these things. So whatever is good and holy and righteous and true, those are the things that we ought to dwell on. We're supposed to think on those things, and as Scripture tells us, a little leaven ruins the loaf, and this is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to slowly indoctrinate the culture, so that way then Christians are ostracized. And it's not because they hate us, it's because they hate our Father, they hate who we represent, and they hate truth, because if the word is true, then that means that they are condemned already. So, without me just ending on a sour note, I think obviously we should be in prayer for these people, but I also think that we need to make our voices heard and to let Audible know that this is not something that we enjoy or stand for. So I don't really know what else to tell you there, other than I was dissatisfied at the end. I'm still going to give it 5 stars with this exception, and this will be really the only disclaimer that I give it on Goodreads and whatever else, is I think people need to know that they're trying to pull a fast one on us, especially those of us that are believers. I would say people that aren't Christian, they're going to be bothered by it, or at least it's going to cause them to roll their eyes or something, because that's really all it is. And that's if people are being honest. But a lot of times people aren't going to be honest, and they're going to say, no, this is okay. This is fine. It didn't bother me at all. I didn't even think about it. You're just a bigot, whatever. What else is new, I guess? So I guess that's really all I have to say. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up and a fair warning ahead of time. Maybe you guys got something out of this video, and maybe I just didn't rant and ramble for 20 minutes. If you guys are interested in picking it up, I thought it was fantastic. Aside from that, just, be aware that it is in there. So thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out and listening to me rant for a little bit. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.